And I was mad at the religious community, and I was also mad at the queer community because I didn't know how to fit in and survive and to be able to maintain my relationship with my family, my relationship with the queer community.
Hi, you're listening to Sam and Em Solve the World's Problems.
Big problems, casual conversations.
The amount of problems we got piling up, I actually wanted to just take you aside. I don't know if this is the right time.
It's the wrong time.
It's the wrong time? Okay.
We have an intro to do.
We'll record the intro. Today we're talking to someone who volunteers for a non-profit organisation called Harmony. Harmony advocates for, educates and provides resources for churches to help with inclusivity of the LGBT plus community.
Yeah, we spoke to him about his experience growing up in Oklahoma and his connection to the church communities, but also the LGBT plus communities. And we also spoke about how we can be better allies and be more inclusive.
So please welcome to the podcast, Parker Johnson.
Woo! Hi, Parker. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I don't know how to answer that question in the middle of COVID anymore, but I'm hanging in there just like the best of them. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So you're in Calgary, and we were just chatting about how your restrictions are, there's not a lot of restrictions, but you're kind of too scared to go out a lot at the moment. What's that been like?
Yeah, so the government has some restrictions on, bars and restaurants, and you have to socially distance in certain places, and you have to wear a mask indoors. But most of that doesn't really impact me. I mean, aside from going to the grocery store or something, I'm not really going out anyway. So, just having things delivered, trying to do it that way. But the numbers are going up. It's pretty disturbing to see. So we're kind of just battening down the hatches and probably going to be seeing more lockdown measures as we continue on, especially going into the winter here.
Yeah.
Okay. And as of recording, it's currently mid-November as well. So just to get an idea of, I guess, where we're at in Australia, where most of our listeners are, where we've been really lucky. And yeah, I think at the moment anyway, I don't know when you're listening, but yeah, at the moment it's been great. So going into winter sounds like it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So thinking of you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's all about having the right clothes. So it's nice because we can go snowshoeing and, cross country skiing and do all sorts of things, ice skating, but you just have to bundle up.
Yeah.
Calgary is actually one of the sunniest places in Canada. So as far as getting sun, that's a nice place to be.
Didn't you say minus 35 degrees though?
But it's sunny.
Yeah, it sounds like the sun is lying to you at those temperatures. Yeah. Oh, it's sunny. What the hell is happening to my skin?
I will still freeze to death.
Yeah. But, it is like, I don't find that you get as bad of seasonal depression when you have sun. Like if it's just gloomy all the time, I think that's when it really starts to set in. But for me, like having the sun is really important for sure.
Yeah. Are the days really short though?
Yeah. We lose like 5 or 6 hours between summer solstice and winter solstice.
Oh my God. Yeah. I think it's like 2 hours.
Yeah.
We're far enough north that it's problematic.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, might just jump into sort of who you are, what you do, sort of why we wanted to talk to you today. I don't even know how to start. You do work with Harmony. I don't even know fully what that is. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what Harmony is?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Parker Johnson. I live in Calgary, Alberta, just like was said earlier. And I prefer he, him pronouns. We'll probably be getting into some pronouns things here in a bit. But I work for Harmony. I volunteer with Harmony. I work for Community of Christ, actually, here in Calgary, Alberta. But Harmony is a nonprofit separate from Community of Christ that advocates and supports queer voices in Community of Christ. And that includes our allies, of course. So we want to make sure that we are promoting inclusion, promoting diversity education, sensitivity trainings, those types of things, the development of resources for not only the queer community, but also for those in congregations who are looking to become more supportive.
Is the typical reaction when you tell people that you have a not-for-profit that's advocating for queer rights with a church, is that do people often get shocked by that?
Actually, I hear a lot of people say that's really important work. They take a step back and they're like, oh, wow, that's really needed. Because I think people just see such a polarized kind of idea of what it means to be queer and what it means to be religious. Usually people see those as very separate things because the religious communities have causes a lot of pain and suffering for the queer community. And so when you hear of people right down in the trenches with those religious communities trying to work with them to become more inclusive, I think people kind of like have a moment of pause and realize, oh my gosh, what does that even look like? It starts a lot of really great conversations.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like in my bubble of like being part of Community of Christ and having a few different like LGBT people that I'm friends with that are part of our church that are kind of like more in the youth program, it's something that I forget, especially when looking at like America, that there is such a big divide kind of between the religious communities and the LGBT plus communities. Like I just forget how horrible those impacts can be sometimes because it's just not something that I have experienced or I have seen. And that's one of the things we want to reiterate in this podcast, I think, is that Sam and I really, really want to learn about all this stuff because it's not something that we experience. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
No, you bring up a good point. It's interesting, though, because a lot of times when progress is made, we forget that we just recently didn't have it. So there's a lot of stunted experiences, and I'll just talk about my own. I'm not a priesthood member. I've never been ordained in Community of Christ. I'm very active. But I had a bad experience when I did have a priesthood call for those outside of Community of Christ into the clergy. Because I was living with my partner outside of marriage, I was not allowed to move into ordination because of that. Even though at the time I was living in the United States where the Supreme Court decision had only come out within like 6 or 7 months at the time I had my priesthood call to even allow same-sex marriage. So there's a lot of gray areas that I find a lot of us fall into in a really heteronormative type of world, right?
Yeah, definitely. When you work for Community of Christ, what sort of job do you have there? Is it mostly through doing work through Harmony, or do you have other jobs as well?
It's actually quite separate. So with Community of Christ, I work for the Canada West Mission Center, the Calgary Congregation, and the Canadian Church as a whole. So I kind of have 3 different hats plus the Harmony hat. But within Community of Christ, most of what I do is marketing communications related and like project and change management. So when I moved to Calgary, the congregation had sold their building, which was a very large, like 16,000 square foot building, kind of in the suburbs area. And my job was to be brought in to kind of work alongside the congregation and the professional groups, the architects, the lawyers, the leasing agents and things to ensure that the congregation's voice was heard throughout that process as we move to a new space. So we've just signed a lease on a new space in the downtown core, which we're really excited about. And the renovations are starting, or the demolition at least is starting next week, and the renovations will be moving forward. So I kind of have more of an administrative role in the church. And then this is just a passion project of mine. I was born and raised in Community of Christ in rural Oklahoma in the United States. And so that's kind of just been something that I really wanted to get involved with. And I found out about Harmony years ago, and I began serving in different leadership roles. So that's kind of the backstory there.
Yeah, awesome. I'm just thinking of Oklahoma and how like the entire world was like fixated on the US election recently. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just thinking about how that was a deep red state and what that was like for you growing up there.
Yeah.
Do you have any perspectives on that?
I have lots of perspectives on that. There's a reason I don't live there anymore. I think Oklahoma is such a lovely place and a really diverse place, actually. A really interesting history. And I miss the people so very much. But it was the hyper religious, kind of conservatism that just drew me out. I couldn't handle it anymore, because it becomes intermingled with politics. You can't have reasonable conversations. You're quoting scripture versus law. It just becomes an impasse that you can't move beyond. Oklahoma is a place that I will always call home, and it really, I think, made me who I am. But when I had an opportunity to leave, I definitely took it. So that's sad for me to say out loud, as probably it is to even hear it. But it's just there's a lot more work to be done in a place like Oklahoma. There's a lot of positives there as well. It's a beautiful place. Lots of rivers and rolling hills and lots of great outdoor stuff. But I couldn't handle that part of it as being a gay man, and just kind of feeling like you were under the thumb of some really crazy conservative religious folks who were in political positions of authority. Oklahoma, I would say, is getting there, I guess I would say, but it's slow moving. There's a lot of misinformation out there, especially in this kind of, I don't know, what is this world that we live in at this point with this, the Cambridge Analytica kind of mess and like everything that's been coming out of the past elections and, the Facebook ads and the money spent there to kind of influence people's thinking and understanding of all sorts of things. But I don't know. It's a mess. I find that like I am just really a lot calmer when I'm not there. There's a lot of triggers there, I guess, for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it would have been a difficult decision even to take the opportunity when you got it to go to Canada. Because, yeah, I guess, was it hard like battling between do I stay here and try and change this place or, do I go to a place that is more accepting and keep working on the issues there? So I imagine that would have been a difficult decision.
Yeah, it was. I actually have a really vivid memory of my now husband and I walking around Tulsa, where we lived in Oklahoma, one night and just deciding what we were going to do, because I had this job offer to move to Canada and then I had another potential job offer to keep me there. And we kind of thought about, he was about to start law school. So it wasn't an ideal time for me to move at all. But we kind of had this conversation about, what if we did this and it would be hard for the first 4 years and then we'd actually have a life that in a place that we want to be, where we have rights and protections as a queer couple. And a place where we could actually see ourselves having a family. And so it became, kind of through that lens, right? Of like, okay, if there's a little bit of a pain and suffering going into this, but then we'd have a great life afterwards, in a place that we actually want to live. So it was hard because both of us are really big advocates for change and kind of just activists within our own communities. It felt kind of like giving up in a lot of ways, but at the same time, as selfish as this might sound, you only have one life. And, I still vote the last legal residence I had was in Oklahoma. So I still continue to vote absentee ballot as an Oklahoman. So I continue to work to create change that way. But it's hard, like to move in general. I think it's hard to kind of feel like you're walking away from a place that has such a big part of your identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a courageous decision. I think that's the right decision to make. I think in some ways you can be more effective moving to a place that at least accepts you a lot more, so that you can actually then, I don't know. It's kind of like, I feel like you got to put your own mask on before you put others on, kind of thing. Yeah.
And that's exactly how kind of the decision we came to, right? It was just that, okay, I'm suffocating here. I need to be able to move and to kind of at least succeed in the things I want to do. I feel like I need more support at all levels. And at the time before we moved, it was still legal in almost half the U.S. states for you to be fired for being queer, for you to not, be denied mortgages and adoptions and things like that. That's since changed this year, 2020.
Oh my God, this year.
Yeah. So like, there's a lot of things that like people just are like, oh, well, it's not great, but like, life is life. And I'm like, well, no, not really. Like it actually kind of sucked. Like knowing that like my employer could just come up to me and call me a slur and tell me that they hate people like me and I'd be fired and have no legal recourse is not fun. Like it's not a great place to be, because you don't feel like you can be yourself. So that was a big part of it for sure for us. And, we're really glad we made the decision to move here. It feels like home now.
Yeah. I'm wondering, and you don't have to answer this if you're not comfortable, but growing up in somewhere like Oklahoma and now working with Harmony like you do, I'm interested to know if there was like a time that you sort of struggled with your own religion, or whether you had sort of a rocky sort of relationship with religion and spirituality personally, and that's kind of maybe shaped you wanting to work with Harmony, or whether it hasn't even, but you just are passionate about Harmony kind of thing.
No, totally. I mean, I think for me, I grew up in a place where there wasn't a lot of education or exposure on queer issues. And I didn't meet, and I know people always say this, I don't know any gay people, but like you usually do. You just don't, they haven't come out to you. As a gay person, I didn't know of any out gay people because it wasn't safe. So I didn't really have any mentors. I didn't really have anybody to look to. I mean, of course, there was like Will and Grace. Was that a big TV show in Australia?
It's a TV show. Yeah. Okay. I don't know how big it was, but it's around.
It was back when it was. Yeah.
Or like Queer Eye, like certain shows where, pop culture kind of introduced society to, I think, queer life and what it could look like, but in a very stereotypical way. And it had a place. It had a purpose. It really helped, I think, society to kind of come along. But it kind of created these caricatures of gay people to be like, first of all, white, kind of well-to-do, well-dressed, fit guys who are really great at fashion. Like that's kind of like what society first was kind of their exposure was. And the other exposure my little hometown of like 4,000 people would have been TV of like Pride Parade coverage, where you see people who are scantily clad and kind of like half naked running around, having a great time. And for where I'm from, people perceive that to be like, you're a sexual predator or you are, a deviant of sorts. And I remember being really mad at those people because I remember thinking as a closeted person, you're out there running around and ruining life for me because I'm just trying to survive and fit in. And you're being like this crazy, what I perceived at the time, crazy, really flamboyant version of this. And I wish I could do that, but I can't do that, And I remember having a really hard time figuring out where my place was because I had the queer community over here. And again, I had the religious community, and I was mad at the religious community. And I was also mad at the queer community because I just I didn't know how to fit in and survive and to be able to maintain my relationship with my family, my relationship with the queer community. And that took a lot of time and a lot of healing and a lot of conversations. It also took me leaving Oklahoma and moving I lived in Denver for a while, with my now husband, and was able to kind of have some other experiences there with an actual queer community that is in a city where I understood a bit more kind of the need for that, the need for support, the need for seeing yourself reflected back, in all sorts of positions in life. And so for me, I think that I didn't have a bad experience, religiously speaking. I just had this really polarized experience, and I didn't come out until I was 19. So I was in university at that point. But by the time I came out, I essentially decided that coming out equals losing church, coming out equals losing family, coming out is going to be this horrible experience. But I was so conflicted and so frustrated, that I didn't feel I had any other choice. And so I came out to my parents on the phone. Actually, I was in Western Canada doing an internship with Community of Christ. And I came out to my parents and felt a big sense of relief, but also a feeling of what have I done? That now I have uttered these words that you will never be able to take back. And do I still have my church family? Because I grew up going to camp all the time. I grew up, having these, I went to Graceland University, which is a church sponsored institution. And so what is this going to mean for me? But it all worked out for me, and it doesn't always work out for everybody, but it did work out for me. My family is very supportive. The church has been pretty supportive. We can get into that in a bit. It's a complicated situation, but I just am so thrilled that I had the social safety nets to catch me whenever I did utter those words, not only from a secular perspective, from the queer community side, from my family, but also from the religious community of Christ. So no specific, oh my gosh, this is a really, jarring memory that I have of something that happened to me that was terrible. But, it was always reinforced in little microaggressions of talking about marriage as between a man and a woman and things like that, or like asking me if I had a girlfriend or things like that. Right. But it wasn't because of people were bringing up those questions out of malice, right? They weren't trying to be malicious. They didn't know any better. There wasn't that exposure, and that's changing, which I'm really pleased to see.
Yeah. Also, I'm kind of interested to know if there was ever a moment where you kind of, after going through all that, and I mean, it's always ongoing, right? Like it's a cultural thing. And as you said, you experience it in kind of microaggressions all the time. It's not like a black and white thing, but was there ever a moment where you finally felt, I'm at home here? Like I finally can just be myself. And this is, was there ever a singular moment that you can kind of look back to and that was when it was, or is it just always, it's kind of like a spectrum and it just keeps getting better? Or
do you mean that in a church environment or just in general?
just in general, I think, yeah.
I kind of have to divide this up because I think when you're closeted in a religious community, oftentimes you tend to check your sexuality or your gender identity at the door. Because you don't know how to bring those attributes with you into that space. You only know how to be your Sunday morning version of yourself. So I kind of had to answer that question separately. I will say with Community of Christ, the moment that we announced that we had our national conference in the United States, I wasn't a part of it. And it approved policy changes to be inclusive of queer members to be ordained and married in the church. And that blew my mind. I remember crying, reading that, thinking like, I never thought that would ever happen. I just thought I was going to be written off for the rest of ever. And like knowing that other people made that possible, that I didn't have to be in there like screaming at people and trying to get them to come to terms with this. Like it just happened for me. That really meant a lot to me. That I that's actually what kind of brought me back into the church, was the discussions that led to those decisions and policy changes. Secularly, I don't know if I've ever really had a moment of that, except more along the lines of just reading and education, kind of just self-educating myself on different topics and reading other people's experiences. I just finished reading The Deviants War, the homosexual versus the United States of America. Really great read. It kind of talks about, a lot of us are familiar with the Stonewall riots in New York City. This talks about one gentleman in particular, Kameny is his last name. I might be mispronouncing that, but when you read. But his efforts to get court cases going against people who had been wrongfully dismissed for being queer, and organizing protests and kind of recalibrating the queer community's relationship with their own queerness. Before, people had shame about the fact that they engaged in these encounters, these sexual encounters, but they would still be married to someone of the opposite sex because that's what the optics required. And he had a big part in saying, no, it's good to be gay. It's okay to be gay. Like, we are contributing to society. This is fine. And that was only in the 60s. Early 70s. And so to know that switch was really intentionally kind of overseen by someone like this, who was a part of several different organizations, the Mattachine Society, different things like that. It just really inspired me to think that all of the things that I enjoy now, the fact that I can be married to my husband, the fact that we can have a life together, came from a lot of sacrifice, came through a lot of effort in the courts, and individuals losing a lot to be able to going bankrupt, just trying to have these court cases to push against these really wrongful dismissals that they had from the government or from different places and their employers. And so knowing that I stand on the shoulders of giants just really meant a lot for me, that I am a part of this movement of greater understanding as a queer person. And, the interesting part about that is it's like this infinite layered thing, right? Because if you go back to Australia, for example, and think about like what your history has been, I'd be really curious to learn more about what the queer journey has been there, that led like court cases that changed the way that things happened and lifted barriers and restrictions. And that can be said for every single country in the world, even those that are not inclusive. So it's just something that I find very fascinating. I'm kind of a history nerd.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you too much about our history, but I can tell you we did recently, like it's really recent, that we had a gay marriage plebiscite. I was so disappointed in filling in a box for people who, like, I was determining other people's fates, and it just felt, it was embarrassing. I was like, the fact that I have to fill in this box and return this, and I don't know, it was a great moment and also a really kind of sad moment.
I remember vividly the sort of campaigns for both sides were like, vote yes, obviously. I remember the campaign for vote no was about, like, the slogan was, it's okay to vote no. And I just remember like hating that, because it was like,
no, it's
we're
not.
putting shame onto you for voting no. And like, you deserve that shame kind of thing. Like, you shouldn't be, I don't know if I'm going to include this, but like, you shouldn't be helping each other to feel good about this decision, because it's not a good decision and you can't justify it like that. Right. And just thinking about how, like, things like it's okay not to be okay, that's a great campaign and that's a great slogan, because it is really, but like, it's okay to vote no. I felt like that was taking power away and giving it back, like giving it to people who already have power in this situation. I just remember being very angry about that.
It was a really devastating time because it didn't need to be a plebiscite. The government could have just enacted it. It was very well known that
it also was
like the polling was like 70% of people approved. Like it was
but it
overwhelming.
Also wasn't guaranteed to make change either.
Yeah, it was just a plebiscite. So it was just an expensive, fancy poll so that the government had a mandate to do it if they wanted to, because it was a conservative government. And so what it did was it sparked this really, really hurtful conversation that didn't need to happen. It caused this debate, and it covered up a lot of other issues at the time. It became the front and center, and it was just the amount of vitriol and suicides went up, and it was just devastating. Even though it was, it became federally accepted for gay marriage in Australia. That was the end result, but it just was really, really messy.
It didn't need to go through that to do that.
I'm really glad you said that, Sam, about like the feeling of being in the majority voting on the minorities' rights. That has always been something that I push back on. I'm like, why on earth do you get to decide who else gets to share the same things you get to enjoy? I don't understand why this makes sense. And that it's okay to vote no thing just makes me so sad, because it shouldn't have been a vote in the first place, but it was. And I mean, I will say that the good outcome, obviously, I won't argue with, but, and some of us, for someone like myself with the church I just was discussing, knowing that other people wanted me included does mean something to me, but seeing your worth and your value, on a ballot does not feel good. I can assure you. Yeah.
I feel like we should move into the first problem because this is all an intro, but it's been so interesting.
Yeah, no, I've really loved to get into kind of like and I feel like it's necessary as well to kind of learn like where you've come from and why you've gotten into this too. So can you tell us a bit about Harmony?
Yeah. So Harmony is a nonprofit based in Kansas City, Missouri, with about 130 members in 7 countries so far. It is separate from the church, but it supports the church. And I say that in a few ways. So we support advocacy, education, and resources to be developed and established for the queer community, for queer voices in Community of Christ. And that, of course, includes the allies of the queer community. But Harmony basically works with world church leaders, with leaders at the local and mission center level around the world to provide advisory perspectives on, here's a way that you could tweak your registration form for camp where, when you're asking for gender for housing assignments. We can help you with that. We want to be inclusive of all those who are coming. We provide recommendations to World Church on inclusive language when they're putting out worldwide policies that can be a bit more neutral than gendering the language. We provide education curriculum for congregations looking to become more inclusive and affirming. So some language here, the welcoming and affirming program in Harmony, I try to usually explain being welcomed in is someone opens the door and says, come on in. When you get there, you realize there's some limitations on your participation. An affirming congregation would say, come on in and, we'd love for you to engage in full participation that anyone else can enjoy. So that means positions of leadership, authority. That means being able to be ordained. That means being able to be married in that church, just like your straight counterparts. So yeah, we have a lot of great work going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And some of that stuff I would never have thought about the need for.
Yeah.
Because I feel included.
Yeah.
So it's hard when you don't.
But it's also like I know when we had one of our last youth camps, we had a leader that we hadn't had before. We never had someone who used they, them pronouns before. So we needed to think about how we dealt with that, whether we needed to sort of say that to the kids, whether they needed to know that and so that how they could treat them, or even housing. We just hadn't ever considered what we would do if we couldn't put someone in girls and couldn't put someone in boys. And luckily for us, they were very comfortable talking to us and very open to saying like, oh, I'm happy to go into the girls' dorms kind of thing, or, but having a program like Harmony to advise on that kind of stuff, to make sure that they are as comfortable as they can be, and that we don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. We want to give everyone the respect that they deserve. Sometimes it's just a educational level that we just don't know enough of how to do that. So I can imagine Harmony is such a powerful tool to be able to enable those congregations and camps and ministers to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a nice thing to be able to kind of sit outside of the church as well. So some people think that we are part of Community of Christ. We're a program of Community of Christ. But the reality was when Harmony was created in the 1980s, it started out, the first name of the organization was GALA, Gay and Lesbian Acceptance. And at the time, the church had no time to be inclusive on the issue of queer inclusion. So they were like, no, you can't be a program. You have to do your own thing. So that's why GALA formed outside of the church. And it has since morphed into Harmony. And so, it's important to think of our history there to know how far we've come to where we were kind of excluded and forced to start our own organization with our own donations and tracking our own accounting and all of that stuff, to now where we are being asked for our input. That's a huge amount of growth in a fairly short period of time as well.
What has the growth looked like exactly? Like what, I don't know, in the last few years, what have you been able to achieve?
Sure. Yeah. So, when I came on the board of Harmony, I was the vice president. That was my first board position. And we were in a transitional phase. So GALA, we were still GALA at that point. This was 4 years ago, I guess. We were still GALA. And in between when GALA was formed and when we moved to the name of Harmony, there was a break off point where a group who decided that they wanted to focus on congregational inclusion started, and they broke off of GALA. So GALA was formed in the 80s. WCN, Welcoming Community Network, split off from Harmony to provide that congregational support. And GALA focused on more individual peer support, hosting retreats for the queer community, ensuring that people had that network and that social kind of safety net while they explored their place in Community of Christ, at the time, the RLDS Church. When I came onto the scene, WCN and GALA were going to be re-merging back into one organization. So we came in as a board and kind of oversaw the management of that legal merger and facilitated a really thoughtful rebrand process. So we went to all of the members, and not only the paid members who paid dues, but also people who just used to be involved. Years ago, we wanted all of their input on who was GALA, who was WCN, and who do we want to be? Because at the time of what GALA and WCN were, the church looked very different. So the communities we served have shifted. What does that look like for our mission, for our values, for our purpose? And so that was a really rich discussion that we had together as a group. We ultimately landed on the name Harmony. We rebranded the logo and everything, and have moved forward together. But when I came in, because we were in that transitional phase, there was this kind of feeling of being lost, because when GALA was created, it was to combat exclusion. Well, and then 2012 to now, we've started having these national conferences, and it kind of felt like the purpose of the organization had been fulfilled. The church was moving forward and allowing for queer people to be able to fully participate. But the reality is, at the time anyway, only 7 nations had voted to become affirming, and we're in 55. So there's a lot more work to do. And so we came in and we kind of really worked on boiling down our mission, our values, to be really hyper-focused on those things that we could actually effectuate change on. So we wanted to do with advocacy, education, and resources so that we could just not feel overburdened with all the things that might need to happen, but instead say, these are the 3 things we're going to do really well at. We want to do these 3 things. So at the time, I guess when I came in, we had, less than 30 members, and now we have 130 members in 7 nations. And I think that most of the members at the beginning when I came in were all in North America. So it's really showing me that the need's there, the interest is there, and people are relieved whenever they have these uncomfortable situations. They want to be inclusive, for example, with a camp registration form, but they just don't know who to turn to. They're like, who do I ask in a Community of Christ context how to do this? And so knowing that there's an organization like Harmony that they can turn to, I think has really fulfilled a need that the church has had for a long time.
Absolutely. And I really like the example that, like you told us before about how you had to almost check a part of and compartmentalize your identity when you walked into the doors on Sunday morning. You had a different version of yourself, and being able to educate just the welcoming gesture, extend the welcome as people enter, to know that they can be included. Like that's something that I think, like I learned right now, I would never have even thought to have said something like that because I would just assume that they would feel welcome, like I have felt. So yeah, I think that's some great work.
Okay, what is one of the things you are proudest about Harmony? Like what is something that Harmony has achieved or something that you have achieved through Harmony that you're really proud of?
There's a lot. It's hard for me to boil down one thing. Harmony has been not only a passion project of mine, but it's been a healing experience for myself to be a part of. We keep stats on any sort of touch points we have with other organizations, with world church leadership, with individuals seeking peer support. And I think that's one of my biggest kind of proudest points in Harmony is that we've had, for example, 37 public speaking engagements in 2020. Considering it's been COVID, that's pretty amazing to me. In 2020, wow. Yeah, 8 advisory opportunities for Harmony to support international headquarters, so the World Church. So we talked about some of those advisory things as far as like just seeking some counsel from Harmony on how we can, or how the church can be more inclusive in writing especially. And I think it can't be understated that when someone needs someone to talk to, they need someone to talk to right then. If they're reaching out finally, it usually means they've been wanting to talk to somebody for a long time. And we established a Harmony family support group. So that's not only for the individuals themselves, but also the parents of queer kids, siblings, grandparents, whatever, people who are struggling. They know they want to be inclusive, but there's a few hangups they have, and they don't feel comfortable going to the person that is actually queer in their family to ask those things because they don't want them to think they're not inclusive. And so we've created this safe space for them to come. We've had in 2029 what I consider to be life-changing and potentially life-saving peer support engagements with members and supporters of Harmony, just on a variety of topics. And wow. I think that's really important work that will continue and hopefully grow as we move forward.
Hi everyone, sorry to interrupt this episode. This is Adam from episode 19, which just happens to be the date of my wife's birthday. So hopefully you enjoyed hearing about my life with her, living in Korea and traveling around the world. And if you did, hopefully you were able to do the 4 S's. To share it, subscribe, support the guys on Patreon, or perhaps speak to a friend about it. They'd really appreciate it.
Okay, maybe we might move on to problem 2.
Sure.
Which is kind of more about how do we, like Sam and I particularly, be allies, but also maybe asking some of those questions that, if you're comfortable to answer them, that people are sometimes uncomfortable to ask but need to ask, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of like turning us into the people that might approach Harmony, I guess.
Yeah. Or even just like from us, our perspective of like, okay, so for example, my first question, I know and I use they, them pronouns for people who want them to be used when I know about it, when I can. I'm really like focusing on training my brain to say that, because I know that's like, sometimes I slip up, but I really want to use it. I want to respect people and I want to use the pronouns that they prefer. But I have had arguments with people, like friends of mine, who basically just don't believe in using they, them pronouns for people. And I don't know how to argue it to them. I get in very heated arguments and I'm like, but it's literally the simplest form of respect that you could possibly do. It's like saying their name. It's just like using the pronouns that they prefer, but I can't articulate why it's so important. And I'm wondering if maybe you can.
It's an ongoing issue, I think, especially that's bound in language. So I can only speak from an English perspective.
Yeah.
In English, they sounds plural to the predominant group of people. I think the bulk of us think immediately, well, that means multiple people. And then you stop and you think, okay, well, actually, whenever I don't know who I'm talking about, and I'm sure you've heard this example, but if you find a set of keys on the ground, your brain doesn't think, I hope he's okay, I hope she's okay. Your brain thinks, well, I hope they got home okay. Like you just immediately switch to neutralizing it until you know the gender, and then you want to assign it. And I've had to retrain my brain as well, and I slip up all the time. But for me, as far as a response to that, I don't know why I would get a say in how people identify. Like, I don't know why that's a thing. Like, I don't know why I would say to them, no, this is, you only have 2 options. And I just don't really understand that. So for me, it's we continue to learn. I think human sexuality, gender identity, expression is all on a spectrum. I think that even straight people can identify beauty in their own gender. Like if you're like, wow, that's a really nice looking guy, and you have zero attraction to them, but you can see that they're attractive. You can see that they are, they have certain attributes that you think are pretty, basically. And same with women. And so I think that, we just have to retrain our brains to think, this is not up to me. This isn't what I don't have to push this agenda onto that person and say, okay, listen, you have to abide by these rules. Well, what rules are those? We don't even have to create them. It's hard to fight fire with fire in those situations because they just lean on historical kind of pronouns within our language that say, well, no, it's always been this way. It should always be that way.
That is the worst argument. I hate that argument for everything. No, it's always been this way, so we should never like a lot of bad things exist that we should change.
Right.
And just because they've always been bad doesn't mean they should stay bad. Like what the hell kind of argument is that? Anyway, sorry,
No, it's funny. I saw someone on Facebook. It was a woman commenting like, it's always been like this. I don't see why it needs to change. And I was like, you weren't allowed to vote until and I'm happy that you can vote. Like, I want you to vote, but like, why are we, kind of just glorifying the old days? The old days were not great for a lot of people. So I don't know. I just see it as a journey for all of us. And I think that, I've had some really lovely conversations, even if they were heated, with people, whenever I insist on giving my pronouns. They're like, well, obviously, you use he, him pronouns. And I'm like, well, to you, because you know me, but like, I want to set a good example that, that I'm not relying on only trans people to identify their pronouns. I want to be also there to kind of destigmatize that and to ensure that they feel welcome.
Yeah, I saw a few posts on Instagram that were basically saying exactly that. Like people should put their pronouns, whatever they are, in their bios, because the more people who do that, the more common it is. Like it's not just people who identify with they, them pronouns have to do it. So I have recently put mine in my bio. And I thought I was going to have people be like, oh, why did you do that? And literally not one single person has probably even noticed. So love that. But it's just such that's the one thing about like this particular issue. It's just such an easy thing to do. Like, yes, it may take a little while to retrain your brain, but like it's literally the easiest thing in the world you could do. And it probably makes such a huge difference. Why wouldn't you just be nice?
I often wonder if it weren't for the queer community, if people wouldn't have as big of an issue with it. For example, my name, I know many women that have my name. Parker is kind of for both male and female. It works for whatever. And I sometimes don't know who I'm talking to via email if it's a name like that. And I just appreciate knowing, like, how do I refer to you? How do you want me to refer to you? Like, I think that's really helpful information to have. But I sometimes wonder if because it's come through the queer movement, if that's why people are being obstinate about it, or if it's truly because they just really don't want people to feel that they have any say in their own identity. Like, I haven't quite figured out what the frustration is for them.
Yeah.
It's funny that you bring up the email thing because that happens to me all the time at work as well when I'm responding to people like I talk to, people with like different cultural names all the time that I have no idea whether it's normally female or male. And I'm like, well, I just put they in the email. And I often think, geez, I hope they're not offended that I don't know which gender they are because their gender may be an important part of their identity. And I'm like, it kind of works in reverse too. If the gender is,
I don't want to get it wrong, but maybe not saying anything is just as bad as getting it wrong and being corrected. Like it's.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a business, so you got to get the content across, and so you write the email and you send it. But just that thought process around it as well, being like, that's kind of why it's important to identify people because you don't. If gender is an important part of your identity and you misgender someone, like it just seems so obvious to me that would be offensive. Why would you want to offend someone?
Yeah.
Like when, I guess back to your question before of, how do you argue with someone? It sucks. There has to be an argument. I don't know.
Yeah. But I really liked what you said there, that it's not like it's not really our place to argue it anyway. It should just be a thing. We should just use they, them. Why do we have to argue it? Why do they feel like they get a say on whether they would like to use they, them or she, her or he, him? Like, they use whatever they want to use and we just do it out of respect, right? Like,
yeah. Well, and I find a lot of people who are really adamant about, not seeing people the way they wish to be seen. They intentionally misgender someone. And I find that to be absolutely horrible. Like on some of the message threads on social media, you'll see people referring to a trans person as the wrong gender intentionally because they're just like, well, I refuse to accept their identity.
Why do you think people do that? Like what draws them to, is it a deep kind of insecurity? Like I just don't know why people are the way that they are sometimes.
I don't know either. I think they just are clinging on to the, like yesterday. I think they're just clinging on to being able to understand the world in the way they used to understand it. And I think of it as laziness. Okay. I think of it as laziness. I'm like, it's kind of what you said earlier, Sam, about the plebiscite. Why do you get to say? Why do you get to tell me what I'm going to identify as? And I think it's just kind of a leftover, a holdover of, and I usually find it's white folks who are the ones that do this. And I'm white for those who can't see me. I think that so much of what is happening in our world right now with the sense of like spiraling and people really having a hard time having conversations is because it's the fear of loss of control. So as white people, we have colonized, we have destroyed, we have completely taken over many parts of the world, including the 2 countries that we're having a Zoom conversation through. I think that a lot of the pushback that we get are from people who are like, no, I refuse to acknowledge this because as the person that I am, I have a say because I'm white. I get to have a say. I get to have some sort of institutional control here to say, no, I refuse to acknowledge this. And I don't mean to come across and bring in the race card there, but I do think there's a lot of truth to that as far as who actually controls the institutions, who actually, I mean, it's predominantly straight, it's predominantly white in most of Western world. Following up that, I think that some of the things that people feel as far as when faced with changing a language use for them that's very habitual, if they are asked to use a they, them pronoun, I think they feel inconvenienced. I think they feel frustrated that because none of us, we already talked about it. I slip up all the time, but I apologize and I say, I'm sorry. I messed up. I'll do better. Because it's not on them to force to like make me have to retrain myself. Like it's on me to work on that. And I just think there's, aside from these few outliers who are not okay with it, I find a lot of beauty whenever I see Zoom calls and people have their pronouns listed. I love it whenever I'm introducing someone and they say their pronouns. And I'm like, I love that we're moving to this new kind of like expectation that we see the kind of just the collective benefit there of like, okay, it's just better for us to do this, just to say it. It doesn't take any effort just to say it, move on. And it makes, like you said, it makes a world of difference for a lot of people.
Are there any other, like, I know there are a billion problems that people in the queer community face, but as someone who's not part of it, what are some things that are big problems that we could actually take steps to help with or fix or just be aware of and inclusive as a result of them, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that education is the biggest thing here that we can hope for. And whether that's taking an actual course, because I don't know about you, but there's like a million LinkedIn courses and different things you can take to kind of understand other perspectives. I think it's really important to take those steps personally and just to take ownership over, let me do some research and ask some queer friends what some great reading would be. Because I guarantee you they'll have some great queer authors that they would recommend. And I think, in different contexts, it looks differently. But in the church, for example, to plug Harmony, if your congregation seems that they'd be ready to enter into a conversation about becoming a welcoming and affirming congregation, by all means, contact Harmony. And we can help to facilitate that discussion and discernment process. But I think education is the biggest part.
Okay, on education, I'm interested to know, is there something that even you as a part of the queer community has learnt recently like that? Because I find that it doesn't matter how advanced you're at something, you're still learning, right? Like, is there something that interesting that you've learnt recently that's helped with even your education, or something that you might have taught someone that you didn't think you would have to teach them?
Yeah. One thing that I have to constantly remind myself is how much privilege I have as a white male who is gay and cisgender. So, at first, I think when you come out, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm on the fringe of society. I've lost all, kind of clout in my society. But the reality is, I think white gay men actually can still make more in wages than white women can in the workplace. So like, if you're trying to think of privilege, I'm still okay. I can pass whenever I need to. I can lower my voice, which sounds sad, but like I can do things to fit in if I need to. Things that people of color or trans people often can't do, because of just the way they look and they appear. And so I had to really come to terms with the fact that my job is to kind of code switch and to support those folks who are not quite able to have the privilege that I have, and to extend that even within the LGBT acronym. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that I have a lot more privilege than I thought. And it's my job to use that privilege to extend it to ensure that others have the same type of welcome and legal protections that I have received as well. And as far as like an individual thing I've learned, I'm always learning, but I think that asexuality, demisexuality, like all these different words that I just never really had even understood, I really started taking more an intentional look at those, at kind of sounds kind of strange, but a queer glossary to try to understand like what is this? Because it's not to say that I want to make a really scientific approach to classifying people. It's that I see the spectrum and I want to understand everything between A and B. We know A and B because we're always taught A and B, but what's in between there? Because I know I fit in there somewhere. Where do others fit in as far as within the bounds of our own language and understanding? So I'm constantly trying to learn and to find new ways of exploring those things. And I guess the biggest thing is to just always admit that like, I'm not perfect. I think in the church, I'll just say this too. I'm often approached by the church to like give counsel on different things. And sometimes it'll be about, for example, a trans person's experience at a camp. And I'm like, ask a trans person. Do you want me to facilitate? Like, I don't know what that's like. I am a white male, like cisgender male gay person. Like, what would I know about that? But let me facilitate that conversation because we should ask them personally what they would prefer. And that's a way easier solution than to kind of just guess,
On the other hand there, I know that for people of color and Black people, there's been a lot of conversation about like, stop coming to us to ask these questions, just educate yourself. Like the answers are out there. These answers have been given thousands of times before. Stop just asking us. You just need to start listening and learning. Is there merit to that conversation here as well of like, there's a point where, yes, we want to ask, people what they would prefer and for their experience and their input, but also there's a point where we should just kind of start knowing these things and start listening and actually just applying them, right?
Yeah, and that's a really great point. That is a very real thing that I've heard from lots of people. I think it's a balance because within the queer community, I think people are just clueless when it comes to certain things because we overcomplicate. We're like, well, if you don't fit in the blue bassinet or the pink bassinet, what am I supposed to do with you? Like we just kind of lose it and we're like, well, and then for some reason we also assume we should have the answer. And I don't really understand that either. Because I think it's not bad to ask questions, especially when your intentions are meant to be inclusive. You have good, true intentions. It's when people have been saying over and over again, this is how we would like, this is how this should go. This is what we would recommend for a more equitable path forward. This is what our recommendations are. And then they don't listen. And then they're like, well, why don't we have any of these people at the table? Like, I think your example is kind of more in line with that instead of, kind of like, oh, in this particular instance, when it comes to housing, because not every trans person is going to answer it the same either. So, because when you're transitioning, you might still very much outwardly appear to be male, even though you're transitioning to female or vice versa. And so your response could vary for a variety of reasons. And so I think it's the kind thing to do to ask those individuals. I'm not saying, I know exactly that I would recommend that every director just immediately contact that person. Harmony maybe should facilitate those conversations. I'm not quite sure, depending on the relationship of those people. But I do think that that's kind of a different situation in general terms.
Is it kind of the difference of like asking that particular person, would they prefer to stay in this room or in this room? Or to like compared to asking that particular person, how can we include more trans people, just as a generalized thing.
So not generalizing and being like, okay, here's a specific question that we have thought of you and we want to make sure that you feel comfortable and welcome is different than, oh, we didn't think about that. And like,
you're this type of person. Can you help us with this type of issue?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Great. Do you have any final sort of comments about like work that we can be doing as straight, white, heteronormative people?
Extraordinarily privileged people.
Yeah.
Well, I think that Sam's made this comment a few times, like when you feel welcome, you just kind of assume, and we all do this, we just assume everybody else is feeling that same.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a lot of intentional work to kind of step back from our, we don't know the water we're swimming in type of thing, right? But like if we can just kind of look around and say, well, I wonder how that person feels on a Sunday at church, or I wonder how this person feels in my workplace on a floor that's mostly men. Like, those types of questions, I think, invite really lovely conversations. And I don't think, I'm speaking for myself, I don't want an ally to speak for me, but I want them to stand up for me. I want them to go to bat and to say, what does Parker think? Like, and kind of that thing we just talked about. I don't think they should speak over me, but I think they should have the wherewithal and the awareness to say, well, in this situation, I could see how it might be different for Parker's experience. What does Parker have to say? So going back to that education piece, maybe finding some great reading in or podcasts or whatever. I can maybe send you some recommendations that you can include in the podcast description of just kind of some really helpful tools that people might enjoy. But in general terms, it's extending that privilege to those that are not quite as fortunate as you. So if that means in a church setting, going to your pastorate and saying, hey, we should be doing this. Why aren't we doing this? We say we're this, but let's do the work to actually be that. Let's follow that policy change with action and actually do some educational pieces.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Should we move on to, do you have a problem that you'd like us to try and solve? And I say try because
we often are completely unqualified.
Yeah, but we'll try if you give us something. Do you have any problems?
Oh, yes. I will say my husband's been dabbling in veganism, and I love Swiss fondue. So do you have any recommendations for how we can still have cheese fondue that is good, that is vegan?
I don't think I've ever had cheese fondue.
Okay, I have both had cheese fondue and lactose-free cheese, which I don't know if that qualifies as vegan, but it's certainly an experience with bad cheese. I don't know that this is solvable. I have not tried enough.
Well, how was the lactose cheese one? Free one?
It's average. I put it on things, so I can't really taste it. It's not the best. If you're going to have like cheese and crackers, you definitely don't want
is lactose-free cheese even vegan anyways?
I don't know.
I don't think it would be.
But it's just not good. So that's my experience in that. I don't know. Do you want like a cheese recommendation that's fondueable and also vegan?
I mean, I
don't have that.
I came here to get my problem solved, and I'm just sad. So I don't know. If you have any recommendations, or if your listeners have any recommendations, please send them my way. First of all,
here's the thing. I was unaware of this problem existing because I haven't had cheese fondue before. Am I missing out on like one of life's greatest pleasures?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe not. Based on that facial expression.
I mean, I've had it. I actually have had it once in Switzerland, and I felt very sick after. But maybe that was the lactose. It's not something that I have very often. I don't think I've had it in the last 10 years of my life. But
I'm thinking of it's
pretty good.
Am I thinking of the right thing? I'm thinking of like a melted cheese fountain.
Yeah, like a chocolate fountain, but cheese. And then you dip bread is really good in it.
Can you just get because I'm feeling like you couldn't just have a whole cheese fountain to yourself on a night. Like you'd have to.
No.
Yeah, what does a cheese fondue look like for you?
We have a little cheese fondue pot that actually is electric.
Oh, so you dip it in kind of thing.
And then you have your little pokers and you cut bread into cubes like a baguette. And then you can actually do veggies, which I did not know until I went to a Swiss fondue place in Banff, which is just towards the mountains from here. And now we never have gone back because we were like, it's a lot of carbs and a lot of cheese. So we were just like having tons of those two things. And then we switched to be like, oh, let's try some potatoes or onions and different things. And it's actually really good with cheese.
Oh, man.
Okay, my attempt at solving this problem. If your partner's only like attempting veganism, if they're not like super strict about it at the moment, maybe you can have a conversation of like, for 90% of today, we will be strict vegan. And then when we have cheese fondue, we'll break it then. But we will try to offset that cheese fondue time with being really good about it during the day would be my recommendation. Because I'm not sure you're ever going to find a vegan cheese that's good. But also, I don't know that we would even be able to, if we did have one, we may not have the same one in Canada. So I don't know that we would be able to recommend that.
No, but I think that that's a great recommendation because like whenever you hear the thing about like veganism and vegetarianism, which I've learned through episodes of this podcast, is that you don't have to be 100% vegetarian or vegan. You can be like, you can try to eat less meat and you can try to eat less, more vegan and stuff like that. So I feel like that's a really good balance. Like if you love cheese fondue, I feel like maybe that's an area where that's something that you can enjoy, but
and maybe
not
just
have to feel guilty about having that, especially if you can, be more vegan in other areas.
If there's something particularly like, I don't know, if climate is one of the main reasons that you've wanted to go vegan or something like that, maybe you can look into the different cheeses and experiment with different cheeses that may have been produced more ethically or whatnot, but may still not be quite vegan. Maybe that's something to look at.
I'm a big fan of like picking battles. Like, and if cheese fondue is like
not a battle you're willing to sacrifice,
then I think that's more than okay. Like,
especially in COVID, like life sucks. And if cheese fondue brings you joy, then do what you got to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's a fair kind of just compromise there because I think it's not like I have fondue all the time. Fondue is like more of a 2 times a year type of thing, maybe.
I thought you were going to say 2 times a week. And I was like, yeah, that seems fair.
No, I'm thinking like holidays and stuff. And I got kind of spoiled because my husband's family is partially Swiss. And so when we've been to Switzerland to visit and stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so good.
Hold on a minute. So you're married to a Swiss person and you have all the scenery. This is not fair.
It's true. Yeah. Well, my husband's background is really interesting. He's actually Swiss Japanese and on his dad's side, and his mom is from Texas. And he grew up in Los Angeles.
Japanese.
Yes.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh man.
Well, that's some good food.
That's
right?
A lot of
all of the
culture.
good things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm very spoiled.
Yeah. Yeah, very jealous.
I think 90-10, as is the tea ratio, is the best bet there.
90% tea, 10% milk. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good tea ratio.
I'm doing it. I'm going to recommend that. I'll report back.
Well, perfect segue there also into recommendations. Have you thought of one, Sam?
A bunch of great music came out this week. And I'm going to recommend one really good song that got me pumped up. It was so good. It's by Mansionair. Have you guys heard of Mansionair before?
Briefly.
There's a song called, I don't know if you want to say Guillotine or Guillotine. In the song, they say Guillotine.
Yeah, that's how we say it.
Yeah. Anyway, the song is called...
Australian it and put the L's in.
Well, I'm pretty sure Mansionair are actually Australian as well.
Oh, okay.
So I know my mum says guillotine as well. I don't know. It's
maybe
one of those
I'm just wrong.
Guillotine, I think, is a bit more bogan. But the point is, the song is called Guillotine. It's by Mansionair and someone else. There's a lot of letters in there, artist. So, but anyway, we'll link it. And,
what's the vibe?
It is very much a pump up song.
Okay.
If you want to go to the gym or you just want to feel like a badass, put this song on.
Okay.
It's a great, fun vibe. It made me feel really good on a Friday. It came out on a Friday and I was like, yeah, the week's over. Like,
nice.
It was great.
Do you have a recommendation, Parker?
Can I reiterate one that I gave earlier about the book that I just finished? So, The Deviants War by Dr. Eric Cervini. definitely check that out. I can send you a link if you'd like. Really good at least on the US side of things with history. But it really changed my perspectives in a lot of ways. So
Great.
Awesome.
I'm going to recommend a TV show that I honestly think I might have recommended before, but I watched it at the very beginning of quarantine, and now I've kind of circled back to it because it was my favorite thing that I watched this year. And so I'm back in it. It's called The Bold Type, and it's on Stan if you're in Australia. It's like a show about 3 women in New York, and they work in a magazine, and they're all best friends. And it's just quality. It's kind of Gossip Girly, and it's kind of like Sex and the City, except that it's like women empowerment. Like it's got 3 really strong female characters, and the boss is nice. She's not mean. And it's just like everything I wanted those shows to be. Like, it's really good. I love it. This is the second time I'm watching it, and I will definitely be watching it a third time, I reckon, this year. It's so good. One of my new favorite shows.
It's called what? Sorry?
The Bold Type. Which Sam made a joke that it was a font. that I was recommending a font.
I genuinely misinterpreted what you were talking about.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a TV show. It'll be linked in the show notes. I don't know where you can watch it in the US or Canada, but it is American, so I'm assuming that you can watch it there.
Yeah, if it's on Stan, I don't know how all the streaming services cross over.
Yeah.
It sounds like it would
Stan
be
is like
Fox
another
owned.
Netflix that we have here.
It's like Hulu, I think. It might be Hulu, but it's slightly different. Some of the shows have different rights, so I don't know.
Yeah.
It also has an Australian actress as one of the lead characters, so that's great.
At least in Canada, they'll probably be on Crave. Crave is our like Hulu version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's where you can get it.
Okay, yeah. It's really annoying how
Right?
They cross
cable
over.
TV became streaming and it was great for 5 minutes and now it's cable again.
Exactly. Yes.
So annoying.
But also Australia was very late to the Netflix game. So we
late.
got Stan before we got Netflix. And so they compete over the rights to everything. And so
Ugh.
it's halved. Everything is on one of the two and nothing's on.
So you have to pay for
I
both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Stan is the Murdoch owned one.
I don't know. But
I didn't support it for a long
we
time
didn't
out
get
of spite.
Netflix until 2015, I think.
No
Yeah.
way. Could you at least like lie about your IP address?
Yeah, you could use a VPN.
Okay.
We all were using VPN. I think Australia as well for the longest time had the highest, not even per capita, just the highest amount of illegally downloaded content.
Yeah, because nothing was available to us.
Yeah.
I remember being at
Country.
IYF and being like, I've never had Netflix before.
Because we are
And that was in 2014.
so dominated by the Murdoch media empire here.
Yeah.
It is insane.
Have you watched Please Like Me?
I have heard of it. I used to like that guy. He was on a different show and I watched him on there, but I haven't seen that show, I don't think.
What is it?
It's Australian. It's so good.
Yeah, do you remember that show, the game show, and there was that guy, I think his name is Josh something, and he's really kind of like young, baby-faced, scraggly looking guy.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
I don't know what show, talking about your
Never
generation.
heard of this.
I think
100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, it is so good.
definitely have to watch it.
I've never
Yeah.
seen this man in my life.
He was on talking about your generation, I think.
I don't watch TV.
I remember watching a few episodes of that,
Yeah.
like years ago.
Highly
is it good
recommend
then?
because like he's hilarious, but in like an awkward, hilarious way.
Yeah.
And he wrote the show and he's like the main actor, and he didn't intend for it to be a comedy. It was meant to be about like real life, but like the way he engages with real life is just hilarious. It's so good.
Yeah.
So
Those are always so much funnier when shows did, like Scrubs originally was not intended to be a comedy.
yeah.
And then they were like, this is a comedy, right? They were like, of course.
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I just find that when like comedy is rooted in like, I don't know, tragedy or anything more meaningful, it's so much funnier.
It sounds
true.
so dark. But yeah, you're right.
It provides like this meaningful root to it, which is
Yeah.
why, I love Dave Chappelle. And anyway, he's the best.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Parker. I have learned so much, and I'm so glad that we could have this conversation and it feel comfortable and just...
Yeah, I felt
Yeah.
really included, as I normally do, but it was really nice to be included by another community.
Yeah, and to learn about how we can better include your community and the queer community, and
Yeah, I really appreciate all your insight, especially divulging a bit into your personal experience of your past and what led you to Harmony. And it was cool to really learn about Harmony too. So thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can subscribe, leave us a review, follow us on Instagram, show us where you're listening by posting and tagging us on Instagram. We also have a Patreon account and you can subscribe there and support us if you'd like.
Also, the music is by The Vinyl Press and you can find them on Instagram at The Vinyl Press.
Yeah, and send us any problems that you have. We want to solve them for you.
Woo!